I should start with good news and bad news. The bad news is I don't have all the answers. The good news is I think collectively we probably do. And I've been trying to pull together insights, questions from my conversations with you. And I've got one absolutely overriding view. The age of heroic leadership is over, which is actually great. We don't need any more Napoleons, any more Jupiterian leaders. It's an age of distributed leadership, and that means that all of us in all the leadership positions we hold, and we hold many through our careers, through our lives, we have to actually act like and model the types of leadership which we want to see in the world. Because I was discussing at tea this morning, the thing is there is no one else to rescue us. We are the people we have been waiting for. And that's a responsibility. It's a generational one, and you take different positions as you move through your career and your life. But if not us, who? If not now, when? So this is kind of my motto for my theory of change. You have to forgive John Wesley for living in the 18th century. So he's always used he and man. A great leader of the 18th century religious revival that created the Methodists, the dissenting tradition in British Protestantism, which actually probably informed the Labour Party, my political party, more than Marxism, so Methodism. And this is really important. I came across this as an epigraph for a book by Anthony Pohl called Agents and Patients, and it's true about life. You are better to be an agent than a patient. Better to be actively involved in doing things rather than having things done to you. That's a very important element. We're here to discuss what's going on, and we're here to discuss, in Lenin's formulation of Sarah's frustration with analyzing the problem, what is to be done. And whatever one thinks of Lenin's politics, he was a phrase maker. That's a great phrase. His observation about revolution, about the Russian Revolution, worked for me for the pandemic. He said, there are decades in which nothing happens, and there are years in which decades happen. I think the years of the pandemic, decades happened in change. We are still psychologically accommodating to that, organizationally accommodating to that, economically accommodating to that. That's a whole other lecture, and in a way I'd rather this wasn't a lecture. I'd think of this as a conversation. It's a conversation we started yesterday. We're going to continue this evening and tomorrow, I hope. And I've been going around listening to you talk, listening to your feedback. I've been talking to you, answering your questions partly. So some of you will hear a bit of repetition of my thoughts because I'm relatively consistent about what my responses are. And I think the issues you've been talking about are really clear. Change. How do you achieve change? What are the obstacles to change? How do you achieve authority? The authority to implement the change, the authority to stand up for your change, the authority that you need behind you, backing you, doing change. There's a whole other great question I was asked this morning. Are we in danger of forgetting our history? And the answer is, I think we're in danger of ignoring or forgetting the fact that people choose histories to bolster a point. The question I was asked is, why do young people not know who won the Second World War? The actual answer is nobody in Britain knows the right answer, that it was Russia, the USSR, that won the Second World War. And the reason that we think that Britain won this, constructions of history are constructions of ideology, and they're facts assembled to make a story. There's a whole other conversation we could have had around that. There's the challenge that Peter made this morning. I've seen that presentation again and again and again. Look, yes, versions of that OECD presentation we got yesterday we've seen before, but is anybody seriously telling me in this room there has been no productivity improvements in health services in each of their countries? Heart and lung transplants are done by district general hospitals in the UK. It used to be only one person in the world could do a heart transplant. Now, routine. There has been massive increase in productivity in forms of treatment. There hasn't been transformations in customer service. There's not been transformations in some services. And I think, and again, it's a matter for a different conversation, what the age we are in offers transformation through machine learning. Some call it AI, but broadly it's machine learning. Through biosciences, advanced in biosciences, advanced in pharmacy, and some of the AI applications, and machine learning applications too. We are on the edge of productivity transformations in detection, prevention, and cure. That really changes the shape of the systems that we're working in. And a lot of, I think, the things that we've been talking about, the uncertainties, are actually because we are in an interregnum. We are in a phase between phases. And it's important to understand that, and I'll come on to that later. And someone said to me, "You're an optimist." I said, "Of course I'm an optimist. I'm a progressive. I chose progressive politics. Yes, it's hard," as Gramsci said. Pessimism of the intellect. Understand where things are, but do not ever believe they can't change. My lifetime, part of my lifetime, has seen equal marriage. 1969, the Stonewall riots. Gay men, lesbians, fighting the cops in New York, saying we're not taking this. 2009, President Obama brings in equal marriage. 40 years for a social transformation. And there's something in that I'll come back to about how is change achieved? Change isn't achieved by somebody else you need to pester, somebody else you need to give an information pack to, a product to. So, of course I am very, very optimistic. And listening to you, I heard a real shared, there's discussion about values this morning. The important values, openness, yes. Curiosity, yes. I think there was that one that people always like to say, a willingness to be challenged is a really great value. Most people, when they say that, mean, I really want to be challenging to you. I don't really want you to challenge me. So the reciprocal nature of challenge, being willing to be challenged as well as being challenging. So I hope that is part of what we do, that you challenge me for the things I say. And I've seen people going, I don't agree with that, politely, but there's conversations to be had, because that's how I change my mind, through conversation. And one of the things about a minister, a conservative minister in a UK government said, why can't we get teachers to change their behavior in the classroom? And I went, have you ever changed your behavior because a stranger sent you a letter? And that's what British bureaucracy is. You pass a law, or the government, the minister makes a speech, they say they want things to happen, the department send out a circular, and it descends through and I've never changed my behavior because a stranger sent me a letter. And I don't know why any minister, any politician, any bureaucrat believes that's a way of achieving change. And there's a very strong sense of being values-driven, evidence-driven, really being responsive to the environment we're in, and that's very important. But I suppose the two things I picked up, which I would challenge, there was an element, and David picked it up, othering. If only the politicians would listen. The politicians are just us. They're parents, they're children they've got parents, they're citizens, they use buses, they use health services, and then a really strong sense I had, which was that all of your models of change, theories of change, were inside out. We start here and we have to push outward, push upward, and none of them were outside in, which I'll come back to, outside in change and my theory of change, and I hope that will spark some thoughts in you. So what I'm going to try and do for you now is quickly summarize what I think is the global context of change, get into the changing European context, getting into what that means for politicians, the changing political context, and the unavoidable part of discussing European politics and US politics, the rise of populism. So that's, for me, the issues I want to run through, and then I'll get on to theories of change and storytelling and ways to deal with them. So next slide. It's not so much the elephant in the room as the elephant in the world. The election of Donald Trump. This is RFK Jr., an embarrassment to his family, but he is going to be health secretary in the United States if he gets through the nomination process. And Donald Trump is the fact of global politics at the moment. That election has been has been the proof point for so many people being able to say on social media, in articles, in op-eds, wherever, saying, this election proves once again I'm right. And then they give their theory of the world. Now I have a theory about this election because I am right about this election. America has been a 50-50 country since the 1980s, late 1980s. It's a 50-50 country. This election, a 1% swing in the 3 blue wall states, and we'll be talking about Madam President. In this election, Donald Trump hasn't got over 50% of the vote. He's got 49.8% of the vote. Harris is 1.6% behind. She has more votes in this election than Trump won with in 2016, more votes than Trump lost with in 2020. So, yes, this will be a disastrous presidency for America, a disastrous presidency for people who believe in health, a disastrous presidency for, I think for America in terms of inflation. Tariffs will cause inflation. I think it will be bad for the voters who voted for Trump. And it will damage multilateral organizations. It will damage action on climate. Damage Ukraine, it will damage Taiwan. You can go through what it's going to do. It will strengthen the strongman leaders, Modi, Xi, Putin, who Trump clearly identifies with. But in 2028, which is before the next UK general election, in 2028, the next US presidential election will have neither a Biden nor a Trump on the ballot. And there's been a Biden or a Trump on the ballot in every election since 2008. So we're in the end of an era, the end of an era, obviously, but the end of an era. And that is important. Now, the challenge for Democrats is, and for Republicans is, Trump won as well because he was charismatic and he was funny, a brutal humor, an inhumane humor, but he had a wit about him. And that's going from him with his failing faculties. But his Vice President Vance isn't that. I can't see any Republican senator who's that. So there's a generational change coming, and that's a theme I think has been hovering around our conversations too, which is what do we do about generational change? What do we do about intergenerational responsibilities? And that's an echoing theme which will not be addressed by the Trump presidency. And things which aren't addressed do come back into politics. There is also another change in global context. The next slide. Climate crisis. Climate crisis has gone in the last 5 years, I think, politically from being highly contested. It's not happening. It's not real. Is there any evidence? To it's so big we can't deal with it. And that's an issue in politics. And I think underneath a lot of the movements of popular opinion, voters and everything, is they think climate crisis is real, but they don't know what to do about it, and they don't think they've got politicians who know what to do with it or have a language about it. And there's a thing about being in an interregnum, being in a between period. It requires leadership at the very top of all professions, of every organization, to go, we need to start moving in this direction. The post-war Reconstruction period was really successful, 1950 to 1975. A long, long boom, 30 years boom in most of the global north. Successful in multilateral institutions, successful in creating the European Coal and Steel Community, and then the Common Market and the EEC and now the European Union. Lots of successes come from that period. We've had other turning points, the 1975 inflation, the OPEC inflation. That led to a massive political turning point. Inflation does hurt incumbent governments. All around the world, people were thrown out because of inflation in the late 70s. That led to the neoliberal settlement economically, which we're living in. That came to its own end in the global financial crisis, and it's been running on without any gas since 2009, 2010, has been irritating all voters who want to see an end to neoliberal governance. There's all of these interlocked issues, and this is an issue, that's a picture of Australia. Mainly climate crisis has its biggest impact in the Global South. And the Global South is itself, the Global South has benefited from globalization and the cuts in the number of people in poverty. It's benefited in many ways. Reparations are on the agenda for climate crisis. Reparations are on the agenda for the forced enslavement of African people. and reparations for the African diaspora, wherever they are the consequences of being forcibly enslaved. And China. That's the other big fact about modern politics, is China. You look at 1,000-year perspective, across the last millennium, China's been the biggest economy in the world apart from 100 years. And those 100 years were very recent, the century of humiliation. You know, China was made poor by a combination of British imperialism and German imperialism, but the British Empire should take its responsibility, and then by the consequence of their violent civil war and the consequence of early Maoism. But you can't hold the Chinese economy down. From the late 1970s onwards, it re-entered the global economy. 1 billion people entered the global labor market, in effect. That's one of the big changes going on. It's one of the reasons that people feel a dislocation by globalization. A very big economy has re-entered the room. And it's so big, it pushes us all up against the wall. But it's a fact. China is there. And that is one of the big global facts, and it's there in the politics of America. It's there in the politics of the European Union with EVs and batteries for electric vehicles. It's there in the politics of the South China Sea. South China Sea, a third of world trade goes through there. Climate crisis affects world trade. The levels of the Panama Canal are lower now. You can't come through the Panama Canal as regularly as before. That hits prices. As all of these things are behind, and they're big issues, each one of them, and I reckon most voters don't ever think of them as issues separately. They worry that their leadership class don't know what to do about them. They worry that there's not a plan, and by and large, they're right. The next slide. Europe's changing. Now, there's been a bit of there's a big response being to Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. There's been a bit of an attempt by politicians to talk as though it's the first time since the 40s that there's been war on European soil, which is news to Yugoslavians or former Yugoslavians. There's been war. There was war in a country, civil war in a country, ethnic cleansing in a country that sits between Greece and Italy. You can't really be more on the European mainland than that, but we memory hold that. Ukraine. This has raised a challenge to the current European model, and I think it's important to understand that. The European model was two pillars: culture and trade. So the euro is an expression of an economic model. The single market is an expression of a different, conflicting economic model, but they sit together. This is a reminder there's a third pillar of Europe, the Europe we believe in, and that is defense and security. And it poses a huge question because one of the strongest defense partners of European countries is Britain, who's left the European Union. So there's a big question challenge here. There is, let's face it, Britain leaving the European Union helped the European Union by unifying it, but Europe itself is creating a fortress against migration. And that is partly driven by politics, but it's also partly driven by the essence of the European Union, which has always had about it. It's a club. It's a Christian club. We know it's a Christian club. Why is that? Because there's no chance of Turkey ever joining. If you weren't simply a Christian club, you'd have a pathway for Turkey to join. So we know what it is. It's a white Christian Northern European, and with a shrinking population. A fastly shrinking population. In most, Italy is the fastest, but so Europe itself had reached a crisis before Ukraine. This may give it a route through defense and security, but one really interesting thing, and I reckon this is true in all of our politics, is the only public servants who always get what they want are the Defense Department. In the British general election, there was no real discussion about social care being underfunded. There was a statement that put out by generals, former retired generals, but on behalf of existing generals, that public spending in the UK should be 2.5% of GDP on defence, and that was just adopted by both the main political parties with no argument, no discussion. The control that the military-industrial complex have over public spending is a real lesson to anybody in public service like health and social care, which are critically underfunded in terms of capital, in terms of revenue, as a way to operate. I mean, they're the guys to copy. Next slide. This is a selection of European populists. There are others in other countries that could be chosen. The country we're in, Austria. Why has there been a rise of populism? It is the failure of mainstream politics. Often talked about for the last 20 years in conferences I've gone to is the crisis of social democracy. The crisis being the success of social democracy was to get as many of the working class as possible out of the working class through education, through mass education, through higher education. A shrinking working class have been available for other political parties, while a growing middle class have become the mainstay of most social democratic or progressive parties in Europe. There's a crisis of Christian democracy, which is that Christian Democrats outside Germany, they disappeared in Italy. Republicans have disappeared, conservatives have disappeared in France, and in Finland and in Sweden they've decided they so miss being in government they want to go into government with fascist parties. So there's a crisis of conservatism. Who are the real conservatives? The real crisis of conservatism is the head of the global conservative movement in the 80s. Globally, it was Ronald Reagan. Now, globally, it's Donald Trump. And if you're a conservative or a social democrat, actually, if you want, politics needs two sides that are equally able to go into government. I don't want a conservative government. I do want a viable opposition who could be a viable government. So the rise and their appeal, we've talked about it, haven't we? Somebody said to me at lunch, simple answers to complicated questions. I think it was you, Mark. Yes. They also offer certainty in a very difficult changing world. And part of the certainty is they thrive on nostalgia. They say it was better in the 70s. Marine Le Pen's welfare policy is similar to Georges Marchais from the 1970s. It's the Communist Party of France. He was anti-capitalist, she's anti-globalization. But in terms of the welfare state, it's a very generous welfare state in the 70s for French people. And the great thing about nostalgia and pointing at the past is the past actually happened. So Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage, George, they don't need to paint pictures, verbal pictures, rhetorical pictures about what they mean when they say you could have this. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party for a period, used to do that too. We had council houses in the 70s. If we were like that, and that is a huge attraction for populists, because progressives, people who believe in change, we've been talking about change. The thing about change is it hasn't happened, which is a huge opportunity because it could be different. It's a huge risk because it might be worse. And there's an energy in the populists just saying to people, it couldn't be worse if we threw it all up in the air and started again. It's really attractive. And the normal response, and I've done it myself, is to say, hold on, it could be a lot worse. In fact, it would be a lot worse. And what you're doing is you're fighting the energy that wants a different world, where actually you should be going, you are right, this settlement is wrong. It's not fair for workers. It is not fair for working mothers. It's not fair for working. There is a way to change it and take that anger and make it an energy. The anger that drives populism has to be the anger that drives change. Because at the heart of it, there is something there. We never understand how popular health services are with local communities until we try and close them. That energy was there, but we never tap it in advance. We encounter it as an obstacle. So there's something about capturing that energy, desire for change. In terms of populism, I've got a friend who has done a PhD in conspiracy theories, and during COVID, she would go to all the anti-vaxxers demonstrations. And she'd talk to people and say, what? And she invariably found at the center of any group was a woman who was organizing it, helping it, pushing it along, keeping this thing going. And so she talked to those women. And invariably, those women had had a bad experience with the health service. And why? Because our health services, by and large, are patriarchal. And they'd encounter services that not just were bad, but then their experience was denied. And the consequence was they became available for populism, available for anti-vaxxing. And I've started saying, it's not always the patriarchy, but it's never not. It's never not the patriarchy. And it's like, we have to... This is another context, and it is, what do we live in? We live in a world of constant interruption. There's a civilizing level to it. I saw it with my sons before in the pre-smartphone period. They were able to contact me. We were able to keep in touch in a way I never was in touch with my father. Never could have dreamt of. They had a lower barrier of entry to being friends with girls. It was like a huge issue in the 70s. It's a huge issue when there's only one phone in the house and it's your parents. There's something civilizing about it, but these new channels exist in a world where there's no bandwidth restriction. We can all podcast, as we were talking about. And the upside of podcasts is we have our say. The downside of podcasts is they're not edited by and large. They're not curated. And the thing about our old news media was they came from a transformative disruption, the printing press. The printing press was such a serious disruption of authority that you were burnt at the stake in Britain, executed, for distributing translated Bibles. You undercut authority. So this disruption that new channels of communication, we've been through it before. We ended up with curation, with authority, with hierarchy, with all newspaper editors who actually corrected text, only let you have an op-ed. Now we've got this uninterrupted babble. It will have to, in some sense, come to some regulated settlement. One of the thought experiments I use is, imagine if the post office has set up the internet. Because we've got the post office, and then they got the telegraphs, and then they got telephones. A logical extension of the PTT would be to add the internet to it. Imagine if the internet had been regulated as a public utility from the start. But it wasn't. It was set up for commercial gain, and the commercial gain is advertising. And so these things are always trying to interrupt us, not because they want to inform us, because they want us to grab our attention. And how do you grab attention? We know you grab attention by being outrageous, by making you angry, by making you annoyed. So it's interrupted and angry, and we're actually kept in a state. So it's like an adolescent, permanently angry but also impotent to do anything about it. And that adolescence in modern politics is for me a real problem. And so far, you probably noticed, I've not really been talking about politicians. I used to have a rule when I was working in Scottish politics, which is you're not allowed to criticize people who are not in the room. And it halves conversations for a long period. If you can't say, but if only the counts... We're all in this world. And I suppose I want to go on to my underlying theory of change. You definitely travel fastest when you travel alone, but you definitely travel furthest when you travel together. And we have to deal with that fact. I've told a number of people here, one of my, I did some leadership work with some hospital trust CEOs in the northwest of England. And finally got around to a bit where one was complaining, most of my MPs are good, but there's one I can't trust. What should I do about that, John? And I went, I'm so sorry, MPs are totally different from your senior management team, all of whom are competent and all of whom you can completely trust 100%. We all work in teams, and we all work with people who are the people we have. There's not an alternative army where we can sack the local politicians, sack the local council, sack our director of communications. We have to work with the people we have, and I think it's really important to understand that. What do you have to do? You have to go where people are. So one thing about this thing is you can always hear them talking. One thing about this thing is you can go back to them. We had a transport secretary, Douglas Alexander, who rushed into Tony Blair one day and said, you've got to take it down. You've got to take this down. You've got to take down the petition site, this petition site. And Tony goes like, okay, what's going on, Douglas? He said, there's a petition with 2 million signatures from people saying they're opposed to road charging. Take it down. And Tony went, Douglas, there's always been 2 million people opposed to road charging. You've now got their email addresses. The question is, what are you going to say to them? And we have to find the ways of creating the conversations. We can't other the people, because they're the voters in the end. And I think you have to level with people. You have to say these challenges. China, it's not going away. Climate change, it's not going away. We have to mitigate it. You have to level with people. And the thing about the disruption that we've got, we have been quietly, silently having an education revolution. So we've got the best educated, best informed electorate we've ever had too. That's why they challenge us all the time. That's why they argue. Because in Britain, you stay at school till 18. Half of you go to higher education. What do you expect people to do? To still doff their cap and go, I'm sorry, you're in charge. It is hard, and any of you who manage Gen Z, any of you who manage Gen A, it's hard. They're not going away. There's no alternative people to, and they want to work from home, they'll work from home, and if you don't let them work from home, they won't work for you. So the thing is, going back to my point about productivity, there are transformational changes coming. And some of what my frustration with that kind of standard OECD, look, it's a really good presentation. I get that. It's a proposition that there can be incremental change. And I'm a big believer in incremental change. So were IBM. They were the best company in the world at incremental change in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And then their business was transformed. Incremental change does not matter a jot in a world and a moment of transformational change. Apple and Microsoft came along and they ate IBM's business permanently. And we are in a moment of transformational change. And that requires, next slide. That requires us to think about it. This is Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton was a habitual bank robber, 20s and 30s. When the FBI finally caught up with him, they said, why do you keep robbing banks? And he said, that's where the money is. And sometimes I think the Willie Sutton answer is the answer to our complaints about politicians. Why do you keep doing that? That's where the votes are. And that is an important thing for us to remember. There's a great theorist, Erica Chenoweth, she did some work with the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. And she actually went into it thinking violent conflict achieves change much more easily than nonviolent conflict. And she came up with a theory which is pretty soundly evidenced. That to achieve change, and this is my hope in the Trump era, to achieve change, if you can mobilize 3.5% of the population, you get the change you want. It's a lot. But civil disobedience, if 3.5% of people who are doing civil disobedience get arrested, the prisons block up. The best way to stop the Vietnam War in the late 60s was for the student movement to stay together, not to split into the Weather Underground and the people who went for guerrilla warfare, to stay together and just refuse to go because they couldn't have processed the jailing of all the people who refused to go. There's something in having the ability, it's a small, 3.5% to mobilize is a lot, but it's not a lot. And that, for me, is part of the answer to how do we, for me, they say, for a hammer, every problem's a nail. Well, for me, every problem's a campaign. I wouldn't do a kit for other leaders about obesity. I'd make it a pressing demand so that politicians had to bend to the will of the people. Because in the end, the Willie Sutton thing, like the will of the people, you have to, I always say rule 1 of politics is the voter's never wrong. And rule 2 is when you think the voter is wrong, please refer to rule 1. If you get them on your side, you get the numbers, then you can talk to politicians, then you get change, because then nobody's going to go, I don't want 3.5%, I don't want that. It's a margin for victory for most people. So this is actually a health project in Australia, and it is sitting around a fire talking. Fire is the single most important invention of humans. Why? 1, cooked protein is easy to digest and therefore helps your brain. 2, fire extends the night. The safe, you don't have to go to shelter when the sun goes. You can sit up longer. What can you do when you sit up longer? You can talk. what do? You talk about, well, that's a safe place to go, that place is a dangerous place to go, that's boggy, the berries should be back there now, the fish are going to come. You talk about, and then you stop doing just transacting information, you start telling stories. That's where myths come from. That's where you develop a way of thinking and talking. We are primates, but we are storytelling primates. We make meaning socially by talking to each other. We make meaning socially by gossiping about each other. We make meaning socially by arguing. That is the beginning of this. And that's the greatness of it. It's still used as a proper technique for men's health. Just respecting a tradition, but also, and for me, and the next slide, a thing that I do a lot with corporates is I say, you should tell your story better, and they go, great. Can we get a comment piece, an op-ed in the FT? And I go, yeah, what do you want to say? I say, we're brilliant. I say, that's not news. You've got to say something interesting. You've got to have a hook. I say, no, that's interesting. Most people want to be the hero of their own story. But great stories don't just have great heroes. They've got great villains. You have to have a dragon. And you have to mobilize people to slay the dragon. That's who is the dragon in childhood obesity? Who is the dragon in... if you don't have a villain in your story, and you want to be the hero of your story, the public by and large go, oh, actually, maybe you're the villain after all. You have to give them that dynamic of the storytelling. And next. Yeah. Here's the most important lesson I'll ever tell you about communications, which is this: do the right thing. That's Spike Lee in his own movie, Do the Right Thing. If you want to win an argument, if you're doing the right thing, you can always make a case and win people over. If you're doing the wrong thing, just stop it immediately. And every organization I know who's had a crisis of communications has been doing the wrong thing and then wanting to defend the indefensible. Don't defend the indefensible, stop doing it, and apologize for it, and pivot away. And you do the right thing, you can have an argument, and you should have an argument, which is made up of elements, and you persuade people by going, this plus this plus this equals that. I think people should have arguments, because I think if you get a proper row going, a proper argument going, you get a debate going, you get attention for that. I always think when you organize public events, you need 6 people for every one unreasonable person you have. Because unreasonable people can impose their wills on a meeting, on a crowd. And what happens is, unless somebody's active, everybody else goes, am I the only one thinking this is wrong? It's very easy to be silenced by the crowd, but you're all thinking the same thing. I think it's important to get consent. This is a big problem, I think, in consultations, is people think they want to get consensus. You never get consensus. You want to get consent for the process, so then you go ahead with it. You disagree with it, you had your chance, but actually. And one of our problems in doing change, implementing change, I'm coming to the conclusion now. One of our problems in implementing change is simple. We have done the internal process of going through the agonized discussions and the options and this and that, and then we go out. Even if we have 2 options, everybody knows one option is not viable, and the public need to be brought in to the discussion, the conversation, and it's like, for me, in some version of what we do internally, look, this is the problem, am I right? If it's not a problem, we don't need to deal with it. If there's more dimensions to the problem, let's add that on. These seem to me to be the facts that are relevant. If there's more, let's add them in. These are the approaches we can have. If there's more that could solve it, that's good too. Gradually, you're broadening the circle of people involved in the conversation. And the one thing you don't budge on is, but these are our values. Some of these options don't work for us because we believe in equity, so that's not actually delivering more equity. Or I'm a social democrat. I will want a less market-oriented solution. We should be firm on our values, but really open on the consultation and broadening open. And then, when we land on the solution, we've got more people who've been involved in it. And one of the things I could see in the discussions about your problems is there's always a temptation to get more and more granular and more detailed about the dimensions of the problem. If you've got the right approach, always elevate. Like, what's the big landscape? What's the objective? What's the impact? What's the cadence of the campaign that gets you there? What's the coalition? Then the other stuff comes out of that rather than this mapping and have we got the right dimensions, and then will our toolkit be any good? So this is the final few things I want to say. In politics, I've always said that the most persuasive things are having edge, crunch, and lift in how you talk about things. We're in a world, it's a famous Gramsci quote, an interregnum. We're between things. In 1947, people set up the Edinburgh Festival in Edinburgh. Imagine setting up a festival. It's still going now. Setting up a festival in the period of post-war austerity. You need, in every dimension, you need to find a way to lead and say, well, this looks and feels like a building block for the future. The future's emergent. There will be the leaders. I think the next period, next 30 years, are really going to be about how climate crisis and tackling it will sit underneath everything. But an interregnum is difficult. It's paralyzing. Next quote. And this is the most terrifying thing. Frederick Jameson just died this year, a great Marxist literary critic. And it's the impossibility of replacing late capitalism with anything else. We're tolerating the burning of the world because we don't have the imagination. And for me, imagination is a really, really important thing. Language is a really important thing. Next one. Anne Carson's a brilliant poet. And this is part of a general leadership point from me to everybody. Find ways in which you can be stimulated by things. How do you relax? How do you get stimulated? I like reading poetry because it makes my writing better. I don't write poetry, but it makes me think of things in different ways. And her argument against cliché, it's really important. To win an argument, you need to speak in people's language. We use so much jargon. It's a great shortcut within ourselves. It's terrible if it's used externally. And like I said, political communication for me is edge, crunch, and lift. Edge, something has to cut through. It's got to be something you say that gets through the noise. Most people don't want to listen to you talking about your message, your profession, your pitch. They're being bombarded with messages all the time anyway. You'd go mad if you listened to every advert, if you looked at every headline. So you've got to have something cut through. Crunch, you've got to be able to say something, make a proposition that's repeatable. So if you say it to somebody and they say it to somebody and that person says it to somebody else, it's still understandable. There's something in communication about going back and back and back. Take back control was a brilliant slogan because it actually it applies to most of our lives. Everyone's got a bit of their life where they'd like to have a bit more control than they have. Even if it's just your shift pattern at work, even if it's just, for me, having to fill in my expenses on a ridiculous system called Economy. We all need bits of there's ways in which it speaks to us. But the most important thing, this is the final picture. The most important thing for me is inspiration, lift. Should be for you guys too. There is no point in what we do if it doesn't inspire us. If it doesn't inspire us, it won't inspire anybody else. And if we don't want to be inspired or inspiring, we could go and be accountants. We're in the change business. We're in the transformation business. The best accountants do help you change, to be honest. And that is a moment that happened through movement politics, through activism, through all kinds of people's actions, people boycotting banks, boycotting South African goods, boycotting sport. There was a movement there. People all found their place in it. There's a future to be built which people can all find their place in it. And there is also a future to be won, to be fought for, a future where you do find the answer, the impact, the campaign, and things get better, transformationally better. It's been a privilege to talk to you. I have left you there's a poem on all your tables, which is from Paul Celan. I think my pronunciation is pretty bad, but the Romanian poet who wrote in German. And he had, I can find a great quote about him, he had liberatory uncertainty in his writing. And there's something in there, it's a complex, dense poem in parts, but it's about having more than one thought in your head, having more than one idea in your head, and be prepared to embrace that. Because I think too much leadership is trying to resolve tensions that actually you have to hold the tension, because the energy is in the paradox. I hope that's been helpful. I'm sorry about the technical stuff. I've always vowed never to work with PowerPoint, and this is, again, shown me I shouldn't, but I think just me talking at you without any distraction might have been too difficult. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity, and now David. I'm going to...
Thank you very much, John. So fascinating. You started off very broad, looking at the global macro trends, if you wish, and came right down to leadership and what it means. Will you just share some of your thinking on what that analysis means for colleagues in the room and colleagues that might be listening about health leadership, particularly in Europe, here we are in Austria, but the UK, Germany and Switzerland?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to my final thing about communications, and if you know what you think, you can defend it. Do know what you think. Unpack what your thinking is. I was talking to some people. We often pool our uncertainty in certain words that we all say community as if we know what community is. We have to unpack make explicit your assumptions to each other working in a team so you actually know what you're agreeing with. That's the first thing. And I always think, be clear about the ground you're standing on, and then you can stand your ground. So what do your values impel you to do? This is a life you have to live with values, because what is a life without values? You can't win every fight, and you shouldn't take every fight. Tony Blair said that to me. He let Gordon Brown take some fights in the Labour Party, and he took some others. But pick your fights, and don't be afraid to have a fight for the right thing. And it goes back to the sentence, we have discussed it with various people. How do you know what's right? Well, you either have a moral compass or you don't, and we derive them from different frameworks, from politics for some, from religion for others, from what we've read and studied and thought. But I think it is that clarity and evidence and knowing how A plus B plus C plus D equals. Having that line of argument means that if anybody pushes at you, one of my other problems with PowerPoint is just lines set against each other in bullet points. That doesn't make an argument. An argument has to have this, then that, then that, then that. So I think always be able to justify to yourself and to your colleagues what you're saying, and then you'll be able to justify it to the political people, the regulators, the people who work in the environment that affects you.
I should have said earlier, colleagues who are listening to the live stream, if you've got questions you want to send in, then I think we'll try and pick them out of Zoom, and they'll be passed to me. So, and colleagues in the room, I'll come to you in a few minutes, and we'll open this up to a conclusion. One of the things that I've been fascinated by recently, John, is about politicians who are involved in retail politics.
Yeah.
They're going for that very simple, straight fact. Yet we've spent today with Cohort 6, and I'm sure colleagues from previous cohorts would recognise this, dealing with the issues of how do we affect change in obesity and children's health, how do we improve end-of-life care, and critically, how do we affect a shift from a health care system to a health promotion and preventative system. These are, in essence, very complex issues, and I think we've all wrestled with how do we distill that. And it seems to me that what advice would you give about how systems leaders leading those kind of transformations can actually work alongside politicians who may be retail politicians because they want that simple headline that goes in the newspapers about what politicians can achieve, want to do, etc.
So two things. One is really think carefully about each issue. So just take childhood obesity. Food and food intake clearly has some responsibility for obesity. it's relatively straightforward to say, let's pick a fight with big food. Let's pick a fight with big agri-foods. But food is freighted with meaning. It's emotional. It's a treat. It's a kindness. It's necessity. It is cultural values. There are so many dimensions just simply to food. It requires subtlety of conversation with an individual about it. Do we think our health systems or our organizations or our governments have the ability to have subtle conversations with individuals? That, for me, is one of the biggest issues, which is you're entering a domain which requires massive sensitivity, and you're blundering in and going. Now, it's not that you can't do something, it's a responsibility for us, if we're trying to argue for a change, to work on the language for change, because language is really, being a commentator, a writer, wouldn't be a profession if language was easy. Being a poet wouldn't be a profession if it was easy. Work on language is hard. Getting good language is really, really difficult. And we probably don't spend enough time working on the language of persuasion, the language of engagement and persuasion. That, for me, is one thing. And which links across to what I think is the strength of politicians we need to tap into, which is the most annoying thing if you ever work for a minister is when they come in on a Monday morning after being in their constituency, because they'll reel off anecdote after anecdote about what someone said to them. And it's deeply, deeply annoying because the pool of anecdote is not data. And you kind of go, you're going. But what those politicians, the good ones, were doing is they were going around their constituencies and they were having focus groups. Every conversation is a focus group if you do it right. You know that saying, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason? You do twice as much listening as you do speaking. Politicians are really good at speaking to people, hearing them, synthesizing the views of lots of people and bringing them in. Now, that power of synthesis, and they do the same thing the other way. The great communicators synthesize complex material and come up with a soundbite, come up with a way of talking about it. Use that communications power of politicians, which they are trained in. They only get to the top because they are able to do this in a way that I can't do, most people can't do. So it's using this, all of us use the things that we have strengths in doing and come together. It's a team. And that, for me, and tap into the final thing, which is everybody I know who's not a politician or worked in political circles goes, oh, they're so short term, they're so short term. And equally, every politician I know genuinely wants to change the world for the better. They genuinely do. They're not making it up. And to change the world for the better means to make that impact where you move something, you put a stone in the stream and you divert it permanently. Those little touches. And it's giving people, it's getting their energy and their skills and their communication and aligning it. So when you have a package to go, you've got a public out there who want it, pressing for it. You've got a set of solutions. You've got a politician who's got you're part of a team trying to do this, to understand their incentives. Not all their incentives are malign. They do have an eye on legacy. And they understand that legacy is a completed life in politics. They understand most lives in politics don't have an impact. But they could have, and they're always available to try to do the thing that has the impact.
So can I just come back on this issue about short-termism? It strikes me that some of the transformations that we've been talking about on the programme, particularly this shift into much more preventative ways of working, the return on that shift is going to occur in arguably 5, 10, 15 years down the line. If we're successful in dealing with improving child health, then we know that's going to reduce the number of presentations of some of the diseases that can arise from obesity, cardiovascular disease, some cancers, etc. But if that investment is made by a particular government, the return on that investment arguably is going to be made, for 2 or 3 governments' time. And that's often offered as a reason why we're not making long-term decisions at a political level into transformational change. Is that something that you recognise?
I recognise the argument, but politicians and health professionals are both public servants. So you're making decisions today, David, for King's, which is my local trust, and you want to make the right decision that will put King's in a better place for the coming years. There's an element of stewardship in politics, just as there's an element of stewardship in public service. And you have to find the stewardship within the politicians that you're working with and appeal to it and structure things so that we discussed it, I think a few of us yesterday. How long does it take to change? It takes 90 seconds to change and a lifetime to stick to it. Now, that's true for us, it's true for our organizations, it's true for our politicians. And so you have to find ways to create an incentive for that, for them to step forward, step into the better person they could be, the better leader they could be. I think one of the issues about long-term, short-term is this, that we've not found a new language that is not a neoliberal language. In the UK, the Labour government were elected with missions, 5 missions, and mission philosophy is, we have a problem, what are we going to do about it? For me, a lot of politics is, you've got a problem, what am I going to do for you?
So I'm going to throw it up and after this, but one of the things that, maybe this is my self-indulgence, I've been fascinated by is, I don't know whether German and Swiss colleagues have come across this, Ipsos Mori, the surveying firm, do an annual survey on who are the more trusted professions. It's called the Veracity Index, the Truth Index, if you wish. And nurses come top of that. They're coming in at about 89%. Interestingly, they were at about 96, 97%, so it's all coming down. I think then it's High Court judges, and then it's doctors, and they're all in the 80s. Politicians come in at about 10%. And the paradox, in a sense, is health policy is often led by politicians who are not inherently trusted, and the voice of clinicians doesn't always get amplified to the level that perhaps it should do, because they are trusted as well. And I don't know whether you see that paradox, John, and whether you'd have any kind of way of bringing your political and communication expertise to bear on how do we create that partnership between politicians and health leaders to actually secure the trust that's so important for some of the changes we want people to make?
So I think people can be trusted too much, and being trusted too much gives you an effective veto on change. Most health services around the world I know of are trying to move services to the left. They want out of hospital, secondary, into primary, out of primary, into community. Yet if you tried to make a service change between primary care GPs and community care pharmacists, you'd see the voices of local doctors, GPs who are trusted saying we can't have this change. You see it in health reorganizations, nurses and doctors and clinicians who should know better, arguing against. And so one of my feelings is we would be better off with a more skeptical public and not a cynical. And I think cynicism is the driver of, I don't trust a politician, I do trust a professions can be over-trusted and politicians can be under-trusted. We work in that environment, and the difficulty comes back to change means the possibility of it not working. And therefore, a conservative voice, let's not change, will always have power, and backed by the nursing profession or the medical profession, change can stop. And I think that the coalition building of leaders has to include all of those elements. How do you use that trust to achieve the change that you want, which you believe is actually in the interest of the wider health community, the community?
Really helpful. Really helpful. So let's come into the room.